Good evening, good evening, good evening. This is Reginal the Peopleologist, and welcome to another episode of Good News at Primetime, where we will always bring you some good news, some great news, some news that can help you, your family, and your community. I want to encourage everyone to like, share, subscribe, and be ready to comment over here at Square Mile Media, Atlanta. Hit that notification button so that you'll be notified anytime we have shows. We've got a lot of content, a lot of good information for people uh, over here. I want to share something. I have to put that out. Uh, the book, The Power Thought, by the award-winning co-host Miss Sylvia Hayes, and I know she always brings us a quote from the book Power Thoughts. And today's quote from that book is "Dream big and believe in yourself." Dream big and believe in yourself. That's a quote from the book Power Thoughts from Miss Sylvia Hayes. We also encourage everyone to take full advantage of, if you're voting, vote early. I think November the 4th is the last day you can early vote. So let's not get any surprises. Let's not get any surprises. And let's look at keeping the good news going. So make sure you get that in. Tonight, we'll be talking about a very interesting topic: accreditation, school accreditation. Um, the first time I ever crossed my mind about anything about accreditation was, I guess that was over 15, 20 years ago when Morris Brown lost their accreditation. And I said, wow, the school is closed because they didn't have their accreditation. And the next time I came across something about accreditation, I had a friend that was at a college, and she said because the college was not accredited, her the time she put in didn't really count. I was like, wow, you mean you went to school for like a year, 2 years, or whatever, and it didn't count because the school was not accredited? Well, tonight we'll be talking to someone, because you also got new schools coming up, people creating schools and all those things. But tonight we'll be talking with a person that is part of uh, a group that focuses on uh, accreditation and higher education accreditation. I'll read her bio before I bring her on. She's got a lot of accolades. Dr. Renee Pellom. She has more than 25 years of experience as a staffer with the U.S. Department of Education, recognized nationally as an accrediting agency. She had the privilege of being the executive lead of the agency's evaluation division, which is responsible for assisting institutions as they navigate the requirements to gain initial or reaffirm accredited status. Renee is a people's centered and goal focused individual who is skilled in developing relationships with school representatives and with oversight agency stakeholders. She is committed to furthering standards of excellence for institutions in myriad ways, and her expertise encompasses all aspects of accreditation and compliance, from initial and reaffirmation of accreditation to substantive change policy and processes. Uh, Accreditation policy, program evaluation, professional development, instructional content, project management, and a continuous institution improvement. She is also co-founder with Mr. Patrick Rome, and she'll be joining us tonight. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to some and reintroduce to some that's already know you. How you doing this evening, Dr. Pellom?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Mr. Drummer. It really is a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with your audience and talk with you about school accreditation.
Ooh, okay. You know, uh, anytime we look at, especially education, everybody wants to go to a good school, and they want that school to have everything that's needed in order so they can use that certificate or degree further down the road. I didn't know how important accreditation is. Uh, is there, well, let me ask you this. What kind of got you motivated to get in this arena?
I actually stumbled upon it kind of by accident. When I first graduated from college, I lived in DC for a while. And then I decided to move to Atlanta and kind of came across an ad in the paper that tells you about how old I am. But it was an
Okay.
ad for a position at the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools.
Mm,
There was an agency within that coalition called the Commission on Occupational Education Institutions. They needed an assistant, and the rest is history. So I needed a job. I got one. I could probably barely spell accreditation. I knew nothing about accreditation. I knew I went to accredited schools, but I really didn't know what that meant. So just enough time and effort and energy put into it, and now I really have come to really appreciate the work, and I just actually enjoy it.
okay. Well, we might as well just get into it. What is
We might as
accreditation?
well. All right, a little bit of a presentation kind of to talk about it.
Okay.
What accreditation is, and basically, yeah. So I think we're at the end. I think we need to back up to the beginning here. But just so yeah, we'll back up a little bit. We're gonna Yeah. So it's actually a status that's granted. We'll go to that first next slide if you would. There we go. So it's a status. I think we pretty much have a decent sense of that. And it's granted to schools that really is saying that they meet or they maybe even exceed certain levels of overall institutional quality, how effective that institution operates, and also student achievement. I mean, for the most part, whether one is going to school to be an accountant, a carpenter, to learn Bolivian folk dance, whatever it is, the goal is that the individual walks through the doors of the institution, and at the end, they've gained the competencies and skills, the expertise, the knowledge that they need to kind of move on into that career, or at least graduate the program and allow what they've learned to propel them, in their professions, whatever those chosen professions are. So accreditation really is the means by which that overall quality of the institutional process is assured. It's an assurance of quality, and that the process of educating that student and all that is involved in maintaining that institution really is rooted in a process of integrity. I know you mentioned Morris Brown, and I know that there were some issues that happened that caused that institution to lose its accreditation, and integrity was part of that matter. And so accreditation does deal with all kinds of areas of an institution. Some agencies deal with the overall umbrella institution, so they're looking at all of the programs that the school may have. They're looking maybe at the faculty, the student achievement, the educational program, the student activities, the financial resources. It's looking at the institution as a whole. That's called an institutional accreditor. Others are very programmatically specific. So you get agencies that perhaps have schools that have a nursing program, or among its many programs, they have a CNA program or a practical nursing program. And there are specialized accrediting agencies that deal just with that particular kind of program offering. So there are different, there's kind of the larger and the smaller, but know that the goal is still the same. And that's that assurance that the overall institution is offering a overall quality program, and that everything that surrounds that program also is operating in an effective manner.
Okay. Uh,
So,
and you, you
yeah,
you
no, go
you
ahead.
put a lot of that. That was a good snapshot of it because you know
Thank
uh, you know, like I said, I didn't. That was my first time hearing about it when Morris Brown. But all accreditation agencies recognized by the United States, well, by the Department of Education.
They are not all recognized by the Department of Education. That may
Hmm,
not necessarily be a negative,
okay.
but many, many are. And the ones that, what's really important as a defining line is those that are recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. Those accrediting agencies are the gateway to federal student aid. So that is a main reason for a lot of institutions to become accredited, especially at the post-secondary level. It's required oftentimes by the states, and for secondary and elementary level, that's tends to be a mandate. But when you get to post-secondary, when you're talking about access to Pell Grants or loans or other monies, usually that is tied to the agencies that are recognized by the U.S. Department of Education, and those agencies are overseen, and they too also go through an evaluation process that happens every X number of years, and they are reviewed as well. I think maybe you or other members in the audience may have heard about ACICS, Corinthian, some of those schools that made the news for poor practices as it relates to honesty and integrity. Speaking of that,
Okay.
those kinds of situations where you see the Department of Ed swoop in, it's all related to that agency, or that accreditor was recognized by the Department of Education, and therefore, there was that great entanglement, and all that happened, and that accountability that was happening between the Department of Education, the accreditor, and those schools that were under quite a lot of scrutiny because of, I guess they were at some point proven to be real, concern areas of concern.
Wow.
So, when you're thinking about accreditation, you're thinking about, as I said, that quality and integrity. You're also thinking about the consideration that there is a consistency of offering, and that if you have, for example, let's talk about it at even something like the secondary level. If you go to an elementary school, the goal, even though we know the reality may be different, but the goal of accreditation is that if a student goes to a school in DeKalb County, whether they take English at the fourth grade level and they move to another part of DeKalb County, that if they go and that student is also enrolled in an English class at fourth grade level, that there is not a loss of quality,
Hmm.
and that the standards that are in place to review those programs that address all the overall areas of an institution are designed to help try to undergird and support, to ensure that there is consistency, between program to program and school to school. And that is also, again, a really important part of accreditation, to try to ensure that consistency of the offering of the program and just the overall educational experience.
Oh, well, we had a question.
Okay,
Uh,
sure.
can a school stay open, or remain open if it's not accredited?
Well, I think, yeah, and I think Morris Brown's a great. Thank you for bringing them up. I think Morris Brown is a great example of that.
Okay.
They managed to. I mean, they lost their accreditation. I think it was upwards of almost 20 years ago before regaining it, of course, recently. And they managed to stay open because, remember. So let me say this: an institution, unless it's, I mean, a higher education institution, does not have to be accredited. Again, because it's the gateway to
Hmm.
access to monies that's so many institutions are, but they don't have to. And so once Morris Brown, for example, and of course I don't know all the details of Morris Brown. I just know I know what most people know in the public, but I kind of know
Okay.
it from the perspective of accreditation a bit, only a bit. I was not a part of that accreditation process, by the way. Um, but once they lost their accreditation, then there were many supporters that came along, as I understand it, to support Morris Brown. I know it was originally founded as part of the, I think, AME Church or the AMEZ Church. So I know that, between that and alumni and whatever other supports they had, there was a support that allowed the institution, though not nearly to operate not nearly as robustly as it had been when it was accredited, it managed to stay open, which was an incredible feat, by the way. I
Mm.
mean, I think the reason it made newspapers and made the news and newspapers and really in the Education Chronicles. I mean, it was a major article in Higher Education Chronicle, which is an elite magazine in the higher education world. I mean, it got a feature story because that was incredible that they were able to do that
Wow.
without federal financial aid. And then they come along and have this shift and change and paradigm shift in leadership and so on and so on. And they found they were able to gain accreditation again through another accreditor. And now it looks like they're up and running and moving forward.
Oh, okay, okay. Well,
Yeah.
what's the I guess how would someone know if a school is accredited?
Well,
Uh
first of all, I mean, a really easy way to find out is to ask them. Because one thing I'm sure of, if an institution is accredited, they will let you know.
okay, oh, okay.
They they want you to know that they have achieved, because what accreditation is it's a stamp of quality. It's the good housekeeping stamp of approval on your institution. And
Ah,
so it's important for an institution because it's not easy. It's doable, but it's not easy. And so for an institution to have worked to gain that stamp of approval only helps the institution in moving forward, and to be able to have again that recognition that is recognized. And it helps them when it comes to advertising and PR as well, if you have a choice. Because one thing I know, like so many people, I didn't know what accreditation was, and I know a lot of people really don't, but they know they want it. If you ask them, do you want to send your child to an accredited school or not, they know they want it to be an accredited school, though they may not
mm,
know all the details of what that really means. So it's really important, I think, for again for people to send their people to an accredited school, but it doesn't have to be, for sure.
okay.
Okay. So if you'll back up on that for me, go back to I'll talk a little bit more about that if we can go back a little bit. So the thing is, not only can institutions gain federal financial aid, um, again, loans and um, what other monies, they're able to get Pell Grants and so on, as many of us have done in order to finance our education. It also allows institutions to develop relationships inside the accrediting agency. I worked for, as you read my bio, and I'm sorry I sent you something so long. That was a lot of information that you didn't have to
Oh,
read. I think I could probably guess people were probably falling asleep just kind of getting through it, but
it was good.
but I did work, as you mentioned, for 25 years with the accrediting agency. And in my last position, my job was to make it plainer than I sent you. I was over the part of the agency that sent out teams to go evaluate the schools, because they go
Mm.
through evaluation process, usually somewhere between 2 to 5, 2 to 6 years, depending on the accreditor. All accreditors don't move exactly the same, but generally those recognized by the Department of Education have some very foundational requirements. And so in many cases, the agencies, though the requirements, the criteria may not be exactly the same, but there's so many similarities and so many ways in which they do function and have many of the same kinds of requirements. But one really good thing for individuals who have schools, if they have their own school, a proprietary school, you've opened a school, let's say you've opened a barber school, and if you are part of an accreditor and you're part of an accreditation agency, then when you go to the conferences that these agencies hold, not only is it an opportunity to learn more about what the requirements of the agency are and to stay on top of policy, because really accreditation, the trick to it is really about maintaining it. Getting it is a big step. Keeping it and making sure you're on the right side of the policies and maintaining the requirements, that's the ongoing work of, that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle because schools are busy running, doing the day to day. So, what's really helpful is that member schools get to meet, and they get to meet other individuals in who are accredited, and develop relationships and be a part of those kinds of teams. Many of the people who are part of the accrediting agency, they also serve on these teams that I mentioned, and they go out. It's peer evaluation. They go out to member schools and they evaluate based on the criteria itself. And so they develop these relationships, which is really
Mm.
an important part of growing your school, that you now have a friend. If I have a barber school here in Atlanta, but when I went to the meeting of my accreditor, I made friends with another barber who has a school in San Diego. And when
Mm.
I have questions about, some things related to whether it's my accreditor or just general kinds of questions to make me think of better ways to run my institution, I now have friends. So I think that's
Mm.
another really important part, is growing the community of schools relationships throughout.
Wow. Well, I know, and I guess over the last, and when you brought up barber school and different type of school, you know, I was, I was just under the impression, but it made me think that it was just for, like, I guess educational purposes, but it could be training in other areas. Like, what if somebody opened a school up, say a mechanic school, or some type of home improvement, or
Mhm.
or schools like that. But uh, just say if a school was not accredited, in the case of a friend, uh, when the school that he went to wasn't recognized, he had some problems getting a job.
Mhm.
So, is there some liability on a school? Because if you go to a school for whether it's a short period of time or some extended period of time to get either a certificate, a diploma, or a degree, you want that paper to be valid,
Right.
Uh, but is there some type of uh, liability towards the school?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be able to speak to that. I would only
Oh.
probably say if the institution obviously advertised itself as accredited and it was not,
Hmm.
then that, to me, then that's a problem.
Okay.
That's something that would need to be reported, of course. Every school, whether it's accredited or not, must be licensed. So part of the accreditation process is that it works hand in hand with state agencies. So whether, again, if the school's not accredited, it's still licensed, and if there's false advertising, then obviously I think that's worth a conversation with the state licensure agency for that particular school.
Right.
But I think in terms of, if they didn't advertise it that way, that's why I think it's so important that we're having conversations like this to help individuals think about, while they're thinking about next moves in life. For example, I know I want to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure what I'm interested in, or maybe I do know. I know, what I want to do. I do want to go to school and become a CNA, a certified nursing assistant. But there's so many options out there. How do I know the best way to find the best school for me? And I don't have a best answer. I could basically I would say, consider some things, consider going to an accredited institution. I would certainly say that, especially for something like nursing. Um, it doesn't have to be the same for maybe a good barber school, because there are good schools out there that aren't accredited, because
Mm.
accreditation it's a costly venture, and for a
Oh,
lot of probably individuals, it is much about probably the cost and the time of it as it is about their ability to do it.
mm. Well, that made me look and think about something. Now just say I wanted to start a school,
Okay.
and right now, and I want to open and start a school, but ensure that I could provide a quality education for students. Is that
Hmm.
something your company can do to help?
Sure. Sure. Absolutely, we can. I would say that the good news is, because I've been able to work with all of these policies for so many years now.
Okay.
Each of these portions of policy deal with very specific areas of an institution. And I'd mentioned it could be anywhere from the program to all the criteria related to how to set up that program, how to look at that program and review it. And what kind of outcomes does that program have? How many people are completing the program? How many of them are placed in the field? If licensure is involved, how many of them are being licensed after the end of the training? What about the faculty? How are we ensuring that we have the most qualified people who are, who are faculty members at the institution as you're thinking about hiring?
Hmm.
What does it look like in terms of your strategic planning, or or the overall organization of the institution? These are all things that accreditation deals with. So whether your school becomes accredited or not, what accreditation standards do is um, they provide an infrastructure for an institution. So whether you're accredited or not, helping individuals, whether that's start a school or whether that's improve their existing institution, those standards can be applied, or parts and pieces of them. Again, if we're talking about not becoming accredited, just improving your institution. And I think no matter what school, whether it's accredited or not, um, you know, all of us have areas and places we work, and institutions or agencies we're a part of, that can always be improved. And I think policies related to accreditation are a great way to apply to your school, or to the school that someone wants to open. So,
Mm.
and I can talk a little bit more about accreditation, kind of the cost with that and such, if you would like, if that's helpful.
Okay. I just had a comment that says
Okay,
this is
sure.
some great information.
Oh,
We hear stories all the time of schools for profit that open and close, and people are going into debt but not getting the skills that they expected.
absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Uh, uh, and one of the other things outside of costs, what are some of the challenges for a school? Because you said, well, I can understand they didn't have enough money to pay for it, but what are some of the other things that could be challenges for a school to get accreditation?
It can be difficult, because it is. I do want to reiterate, though, the cost. I would say the agency that I was with, for example, they basically quoted a price generally speaking. I mean, there are kind of other considerations that depended on how many students, how many campuses, but sort of a base kind of idea, because people want to know, how much do you think this thing is going to cost me, right?
Right.
And so basically it was somewhere around 20 to 25,000 dollars roughly to go from not being accredited, not doing anything, to full accreditation. And so
Mm.
there's money. So I want to have that, say that conversation. It's not all due at the same time, but it's money. And I think that's something that's really important for people to hear off the bat, is
Okay.
thinking about coming up with that kind of money over the period of roughly full accreditation, at least with the agency that I was a part of. And I think it's generally about the same.
Mm.
Run somewhere around 1.9, 1 year, 9 months, to maybe 2.5 years to finish the
Mm.
entire process. Some can finish earlier than that. Some can take a little bit later, longer than that, but that's roughly the time. So I do like to make sure and emphasize those two things. How much it's going to cost, how long is it going
Okay.
to take, right? So in addition to that, because accreditation is work for people who are good with detail, right? You have to be an individual who, either you're good with detail, you got people on your staff who are good with detail, or you go get people who can help you be good with detail.
Mm.
So I would say for a lot of schools that struggle, that I've seen struggle, and my goal was not only, my job was not only to send teams out, but to help schools that once they kind of went through the first stage of working toward accreditation, I then was responsible for helping them to become fully accredited.
Mm.
So what I have seen over the years and what I've learned over the years, for a lot of schools, they have to be able to provide audited financials in most cases. Now, if it's a public school, that's not the case. But for those, we're talking about people who want to start their own institutions, right?
Right.
Or
Yes,
they
ma'am.
already have their own school and they're thinking about getting it accredited. Then having to come up with, you have to have students, generally, either depending on the accreditor, there have to be students at least for 1 full year or 2 full years, depending on the accreditor. That's usually about how that goes. You got to have students for 1 to 2 years, got to have 2 years, or depending on the accreditor, 1 or 2 years of audited financials. If you ever had audited financials, that's an expensive process. So on top of, and again, the cost of audit financials is in this 22 to 25-ish thousand dollars. But again, getting those financials, and those financials have to have what's called a composite score, which is a calculation set by the U.S. Department of Education of a 1.5. You may not know what that means, but you got to find an accountant who does know what that means.
Mm.
And having those students putting the time in to do the work, and again, making sure you get that money there. Those are probably the biggest challenges to navigate, the biggest barriers to climb over. But I say this to schools all the time. And I mean, I come from an agency that accredited um, public technical schools in states like Florida, Utah, Tennessee, the whole Tennessee technical school system, all of Utah, Ohio. And then they accredited schools that were truck driving schools, or
Mm.
mom
Oh,
and pop
okay.
owned cosmetology schools. So and also some federal Department of Defense schools, some Job Corps. It really had the most diverse kind of membership, which is great because it gave me exposure to helping all kinds of individuals work through the process of accreditation and learn so many different kinds of ways that institutions operated.
Mm.
So again, I hope I've answered the question.
Oh, yes, yeah, that was
Yeah,
good. Yeah,
but yeah,
I didn't even think about, there's so many schools out there. I didn't, I forgot
yes,
about truck driving schools,
yes,
uh, because some of them are not accredited,
yeah,
uh, and they got people out there that's driving that come
yes,
out of them, So this is something that, and I'm pretty sure it's going to really get competitive. wouldn't. Uh, but wouldn't the return on investment be worth it to the school?
I
That's a
would say
question.
absolutely yes,
Okay,
because and
thank you.
the reason that ROI is worth it is because then if you've got students, you've got access. You know, if you because again, it gives you the gateway to federal financial aid. There's a Department of Education hoops to jump through, but I say it all the time. People do this all the time, and that was
Mm,
really kind of what I was going to say at the end of my long spiel about the challenges. It can be done because people do it all the time. And I've seen, and the reason I brought up the small schools is because small schools that have small staff do this. Some of
okay.
them do it with consultants, a lot of them don't. And so you don't have to have a consultant. So, as a consultant, let me say if you can do it yourself, then you should do it yourself. And the agencies are there and they have staff who should be able to help you with your questions. Because again, my goal is to educate the community. You know, God will take care of making sure that I get customers, so and get clientele.
Okay. Okay. Well,
So
so,
I always like to educate. I like to educate the public on
mhm,
accreditation, and then they can make an educated decision for themselves.
yeah. But it looked like it to be to their advantage to have someone like you to come in there because that might be one of the reasons a lot of these places get losing accreditation because you can't
Yeah,
do it all. You got to
yeah.
get an expert in there.
Yeah, and I think really, you know, depending on the school, some of them have just a lot more resources than others. Some
Ah,
schools are large enough or just have enough resource to hire an individual or you know make that part of the job of individuals to monitor and be responsible for certain elements of that day to day kind of education because but I mean accreditation because really accreditation really is again about the ability to maintain all of the requirements. There's many things that must be done during the course of the year that a school has to account for at the end of each year to say, yes, we are maintaining all of the 200, 300, whatever number of criteria there is. They're self-reporting saying that they're doing that. And then ever so often they're having to host visits anywhere again from between 2 to 5 to 6 years to show that they are not only doing it when the team gets there, but probably historically show that they've been doing it when no one was there.
mm,
So, you know, again, that is an area where it is a challenge for many institutions just to stay on top of the work. So thank you for pulling up this slide. I think it's important that to talk about this when we talk about accreditation for the most part with most agencies that are recognized by the Department of Education, at least I would say accreditation really is a two-step process. um, that the first stage of that is to work on a status called candidacy. It's not an accredited status; it is an affiliated status with the accreditation entity. And in the meanwhile, the institution works toward its full accreditation. And that's why, for example, here, this is a particular agency where they can stay in that status up to 3 years, and by the end of the third year they have to be fully accredited. And it probably works very similarly with other agencies when it comes to their requirements for candidacy and then moving on to full accreditation. And so that's why I have parenthetically under accreditation that it has to be renewed annually. It's not that you get it and you get to keep it and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
ah,
An institution has to pay dues, they have to self-report about their status and so on. And it's maintained all the time. I'm sorry, you would say something.
oh, no, no, no. I was looking. Uh,
Yeah.
okay, okay. I can see how if you don't keep up, this is something you got to stay on a regular basis. If you don't, a school could. I mean, who notifies a school when they lose their accreditation? The state?
When they lose it, well, when they if they lose accreditation, the Department of Education requires that accreditors talk to one another and
Okay.
to state agencies, and not just at the loss of accreditation. If you were to go on an accreditation agency's website, right now. Pick
Mm-hmm.
one of them. If you find the right tab, they're going to list many of their recent decisions. How many schools have they recently um, reaffirmed, or you might think of that as reaccredited? How many schools, have been on a violation status? How many schools have become candidates? So they must publicly know, they must notify the public, and they must also again, speak to one another and all of the stakeholder agencies out there, the VA, the CVIS, the other states involved. There is really a network of communication that happens between accreditors, state agencies, and other agencies involved in the educational process.
Okay. Wow. This is you know, and I always try to simplify things. This is kind of like a, a, a credit report or something on schools. This is
It
good.
is.
Yes. Oh,
It is.
wow.
It is. So, basically this slide is just to kind of talk about if I was going to, Renee's going to start a school, and just to get
Okay.
us an idea of what those general steps are. This isn't everything, but this is an example from one accreditor. And again, this can vary from agency to agency, but basically you would expect that it will look something like this. As I mentioned, the first step is that an institution has to gain candidate status, and that means that they're applying through an application. They have to, in this case of this agency, they have to attend a particular workshop before they even apply. They have to go to a training, and then they can apply, because this is their way of screening and making sure and informing their potential candidates, those who will potentially apply, so they'll know what they're getting into to determine if they want to get into that. Because again, it's a lot of money, and you want people, again, to be able to make an informed decision. And so, they're going to apply, and then if the application is sufficient, they're going to actually host a visit to visit the school at the candidate level. That from that, they have to provide a report. The report goes before the governing body of the accreditor. Every accreditor has a governing body, and that governing body makes most of the major decisions about whether to accept an institution as a candidate, to reaffirm them, to approve if they change locations, if they want to add certain things. Those happen, most of those major decisions, to use the example of Morris Brown or other schools, if there's a decision to drop a school, that happens at the governing board level. The staff
Ah,
does not make that decision. They work with the institutions, they gather up all the information. This was my life, working with an accreditor. I worked in the position of working with the school, helping them through these processes of teams and applications and all that, gathering up all that information, and then taking it on to the governing board and let them make the decision. And that decision is passed down through the school back through the accreditor. So that is the first status that they would work on. And let's say my school got approved, and I'm now a candidate, they've accepted it. So now I got to move on to the next thing. I'm working on becoming fully accredited. And now I have 3 years in the example of this particular accreditor. Again, it may vary, but generally there's a timeline on that, from the time that you gain an affiliate status, which is candidate status, to the time you become fully accredited. There's usually a timeline for that, and you have to get it done by then. And once again, we're talking about an institution doing this is the heavy lift, is what I call
okay.
it. This middle part in the blue is the heavy lift, and this is where my job was. And that is, most schools have to create something called a self-study. It's a document, and they're taking all of the criteria of the agency. You get the questions on the test, so you already know
Okay.
what they're looking for, and you have to take those questions and prepare them in a document in which you are evaluating your school status as it relates to that criteria. And you're creating a document, and that document is called a self-study. And then you're having to provide the exhibits to back up what you say you do as you've written in your self-study document. And then you send a team to look at all of that. So it's quite a work in progress. Schools aren't just told to, here you go, good luck with that. They have to go through training that the accreditor creates to train them how to prepare this document, that trains them how to prepare their exhibits and trains them how to host their visits. They have to go through training specifically prepared by the accreditor, and then they go through the process of hosting that visit, and there's a report and they respond, and it goes right back to the governing board and they make a decision on it.
Wow.
And then if they get through that process, they're fully accredited.
Mm.
And then, as I call it, then goes the work of making sure that you keep your accreditation by maintaining all the policies and procedures and requirements of the accreditor.
Wow. Well, and maybe I have another question. Is there
Sure.
like a score? Because I guess by credit being in there, I'm thinking it like a credit report. You got a school that's probably around about a 400 or 500, and then you might have one with 800. But are there different numbering systems for accreditation, or is it all the same?
It's all the same. The
Um.
institution is either in good status or they're not.
Whoa. Okay.
They're so they could be an institution could be in a violation status, for example, and they can work their way out of that. I mean, maybe, for example, let's say an institution struggled and they did not meet the financial benchmarks.
Okay.
And so because the department requires the accrediting agencies to take some kind of action depending on where they fall. I mean, in cases where they fall in certain increments, the department requires that agencies do that. And for some schools, that may mean a status that reflects real deficiency.
Mm.
So, and they may be in that status for a while because they probably can't get out of it until they come up with a new financial. And that might be up to a year because, financials are from year to year. So if I, for example, have a deficiency and my fiscal year ends June 30th, then, if I just showed you I have a fiscal deficiency and my fiscal year ended June 30th, well, you won't know what my financials look like again until June 30th of next year, because that's when my
Mm.
year ends. So depending on the situation, but it can be improved. And so quite often, schools are in and out of not quite meeting the requirements. I mean, for the most part, there's a lot to meet. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot to be done. And so, schools are oftentimes in and out of that. It doesn't mean it's a bad school necessarily.
Okay.
It just means, it may mean, okay, here's an area that the school needs to tweak and work on, or they forgot to deal with this particular, area of their strategic plan.
Mm.
It doesn't have to mean it's a bad school, but sometimes things pile on. And what accreditation does provide, though, is a mirror, I think. And if you find that there's a school that has multiple deficiencies and
Mm.
really kind of deep, meaningful kinds of areas that could adversely impact the school, they're not providing kind of using the example that we got that we just heard earlier, that they did not provide sufficient education for the student to actually work in the career. So that's a
Okay.
problem. That's a problem, to sign up for a program and you're not being taught the skills that you need to actually gain a job in the field of instruction.
Yeah.
That's serious, of course.
Wow. uh, do you hold workshops for schools? How does the school go about finding you or someone like yourself?
Okay. So, there are a number of us out here. For example, I just got off the road last week. I was up in New York at their meeting. Most states have sort of coalitions
Hmm.
of people in their state. They have meetings and they bring in consultants of all types to exhibit or to present. I actually presented a workshop for them on one area of accreditation, sort of how to stay on top of everything kind of thing. I did that kind of workshop for them. And I also had my own exhibit table, and I was able to
Mm.
talk about kind of, what I do. Yep, there's my website. Thank you. And
Okay.
of course, there's also my website. But yeah, I travel, and then my website is higheredaccred.com. So that's an easy way to reach me. And my name as well for an email is R, as in my first name Renee, and then my last name Pellom, P as in Paul, ELLOM, also at higheredaccred.com.
Mm. So
So I'm
you
not difficult to reach.
so you're just not limited to one state. You can go pretty much all over.
Yeah, because the accreditor I worked with, and I'm also not limited to any particular kind of school. We are working with schools that aren't just related to career and technical education, but also right now I'm working with a coaching school because there is a coaching accreditor that deals
Mm.
specifically with coaching schools. So yeah, I was working with probably schools in 42 states. I've been to Saudi Arabia to visit a member school a couple of
Wow.
times. So yeah.
Whoa. And we had a question, and this might be a good question. I know you probably answered it earlier, but what is the purpose of accreditation versus not being accredited, having
Um,
accreditation?
okay. I would probably think of it maybe not as much about purpose as it is about difference. So
Okay.
I'll just kind of talk about being accredited. Sure, I have no problem talking about it again, but it really is the goal. I mean, the theory of accreditation is to help an institution to ensure it's meeting the basic standards that have been created to ensure institutional effectiveness and quality. Um, that's not to say that if a school's not accredited, that it couldn't possibly have institutional effectiveness and quality, but this is a way of doing that. And what accreditation does do is it provides a means by which there are standards that are tried and true over a period of time, looked at by many people in the educational universe who have thought about ways in which you can critically look at how a school operates and determine whether or not you feel it is at a level of quality that meets the needs of students and those who work there. So that's not to say it can't happen, because I always want to make sure and say that there are good schools out there that aren't accredited and some that want to be and just aren't, or they are functioning fine. But I would say when applied properly, criteria that accreditors use really does help to up the game of institutions overall. I've not met anyone yet so far who hasn't said, gosh, we understand that when we had to go through the process of accreditation, we knew we had a good school, but what the process made us do is realize that there were gaping holes that we thought were being handled, or areas we didn't even think about dealing with, or we didn't
Mhm.
know how to deal with a particular area. And what accreditation did was bring it to our face and make us think about it and put a process and a procedure in place and name people who were going to be accountable for it. And we would have to address it on an annual basis and all of those things. So I think that's the bonus of accreditation, and I think in its purest form, it really does help schools to improve overall.
Oh, yes. Well, you definitely cleared my head, and I think you helped and cleared the head of a lot of people in the audience. And I hope
Good.
uh, that when you're looking for schools, wherever the entry level for education, whether it's elementary school or a trade school, a college, or something like that. Uh, I think the onus of responsibility, is on the persons looking now, because people didn't look. I mean, uh, and it's important. Like I said, there would be people that because that school was not accredited in that area, and they put the time, they put the work, they did all the stuff, but at the end of the day, when it came to get a job,
Yeah.
it you know they either weren't given, they didn't allow them, so that's a valuable asset. So
Yeah.
definitely, you got hats off. Keep that good work up doing that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we want the for yeah, I got uh, uh, grandkids and others that's looking for schools. Even in I don't know, can you not necessarily daycare, but you know, especially elementary schools. Because there's a lot of private schools. That's coming up out of the woodwork. You see people having schools that catering to different groups of people, and
Mm-hmm.
you definitely want them to be accredited. I'd be mad if I spent
Yeah.
a good deal of time in school, and they said, man, we just can't allow it. That school's not accredited. None of that stuff counts. Wow.
Yeah, so I would say if you know the field that you want to be in, and that's your question, does will it really matter whether or not my particular credential is accredited or not? That go to the end of that story and find out, because you do want to know if you are looking to work in an area where having an accredited credential is a bonus. It may
Okay.
may not necessarily have to be, but if it
Okay.
is, you want to know that now. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's really important that you know whether or not it matters. So do your research on that and find out if it's necessary. Is it looked upon at higher? Is there a higher regard for you to go to an accredited school? And I would say if there is, then it's going to be worth it for you to do that.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I guess if you got one last closing remark or nugget that you want to leave with our audience.
Yeah, I would say for individuals who are looking to start a school, you've got um you've got the opportunity to think about accreditation, and just think about doing it over the long haul. You're in it for the long game. For people who want to start their own institution, you know, find out what's out there in terms of competition and whether or not your competitors are accredited. Because I think I've run up on more people who say, I want to start a school. Find out what's going on out there in the world in your marketplace, and, consider accreditation. It might be worth it.
Well, thank you. Thank you definitely, Dr. Pelham, for all the advice and information that you gave us this evening. We definitely appreciate it. We got to get you back again, okay?
Thank you. My pleasure. It went by fast, just like you said
Oh,
it would.
yes, it's quick.
It's
you know,
quick.
yeah, I definitely want to encourage everyone to like, share, subscribe over here at Square Mile Media Atlanta, uh, and also hit that notification button so you'll get notified when we do shows. Also, without I can't do a show without saying this. Don't forget to get that book, Power Thoughts, by our award-winning co-host, Miss Sylvia Hayes. There's always a power thought for you. There's always a thought that you can put out that's positive, that can help move and motivate yourself, your family, or your loved ones. I want to share a thought with you. Uh, in a world full of low vibrations and envy, you shine. Don't ever dim your light or bend your truth to fit in to other people's narratives of you. Trust your divine purpose. What's for you is for you. That's not from Power Thoughts, but it's from an unknown author. But anyway, we'll be seeing you next week, same bad channel, same bad time. Remember, spread some good news, and don't forget, vote, vote, vote. If you're gonna vote, vote early. Uh, put the work in, find out the details about the candidates. You know what we say over here? Yes, buy, lease, rent, or own the efforts of a politician. They should be doing something that's in the better interest of you, your family, and your community. And this is Reginald Drummer, and welcome to another episode of Good News at Prime Time. And we'll see you next week there, Sylvia. I know you'll be out there. She's out there working, making things happen. Uh, but take care, and we'll see you next week. Let's make it a great day.